It's a pleasure to be in the house of the Lord. And as the pastor said, you know, this is Liaty Sunday, so that means you don't get to listen to the pastor, but you get to or have to listen to me, whatever you choose to, however you choose to look at that. But let's begin first by reading from Matthew. If you'd like to join me, it's Matthew 22, verses 15 through 22, and it's on page 979 of your pew Bible. Then the Pharisees went out and laid plans to trap him in his words. They sent their disciples to him along with the Herodians. "Teacher," they said, "we know you are a man of integrity and that you teach the way of God in accordance with the truth. You aren't swayed by men because you pay no attention to who they are. Tell us then, what is your opinion? Is it right to pay taxes to Caesar or not?" But Jesus, knowing their evil intent, said, "You hypocrites, why are you trying to trap me? Show me the coin used for paying the tax." They brought him a denarius, and he asked them, "Whose portrait is this? And whose inscription?" "Caesar's," they replied. And he said to them, "Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's." When they heard this, they were amazed, so they left him and went away. Now, if you're familiar with your Bible passages, and you probably are, you're wondering, why in the world is he reading an Easter passage this time of the year? We're about ready to begin Advent. Well, you've heard the pastor mention the lectionary a time or two. The lectionary is a guideline that allows churches to follow and cover the major themes of the Bible over a 3-year period. And this is one of the scriptures that's mentioned in the lectionary for today. And so there'll probably be churches all over the world using this particular passage as their morning message passage. But we are. But we're going to look at it from a little different perspective than we would at Easter time, obviously. And the first perspective I thought about, and don't know how to address, but I'm going to throw it out to you for your thinking, is what do you think Matthew, who wrote this particular book, thought about this passage? Because if you'll remember, before becoming a disciple, Matthew was a tax collector. Never know. As we hear this passage, we need to remember that Jesus is very near the end of his ministry. He's already made his triumphal entry into Jerusalem to the shouts of the people. He's been in the temple, in the courtyards, teaching, preaching, healing. He's chased the vendors and the money changers out. The people are shouting Hosanna to the Son of David and just praising him. And things are just going wonderfully well, in a sense, except for the chief priests and the teachers of the law. He's really frustrating them with all this preaching and stuff he's doing. But they looked at it like he was just adding more fuel to the fire, and they had to figure out some way that they could get rid of this troublemaker that was giving them such grief. But after spending the first day in the temple, Jesus went to Bethany, spent the night, came back the next morning, and continued his teaching and his preaching. At this point, the chief priests and elders are really frustrated. They think, we have got to stop this guy from what he's doing. So they came to him and said, by whose authority did he have the right to be doing the things that he was doing? Well, Jesus first off confused them with a question about the baptism of John the Baptist, and then went on to tell them some parables, which frustrated them even more because those parables were directed at making them look like hypocrites, which of course they were. That infuriated them even more. And so they figured, we've got to do something about this upstart. We've got to get him straightened out and get rid of him. What they really wanted to do was have Jesus arrested and thrown in jail. But they thought, we might not want to do that because the people, many of them, looked at Jesus as a prophet. And they thought, we don't know how they're going to react to that, so we better leave that alone. So they decided instead to lay a trap for Jesus. They figured by using all of their knowledge of Roman law and their ingenuity, they could trap him with something he would say with no problem. They knew that he always spoke what he felt, figured it wouldn't be difficult to get him to say something that they could turn against him. Satan still uses that same tactic on people today. He tries to get a person to misplace a word or say something that's misunderstood. While it might be said with all sincerity and simplicity, it can also be taken in different ways, used to the advantage of someone who seeks to undo another person. But these men didn't know who they were fooling with. But you got to give Jesus' enemies credit. They weren't complete fools. They rightly figured there were probably only two ways that they could get rid of this guy that was giving them all this grief. The first method would be to use force. And as I said, they thought, can't do that because the people might rebel and that would be a problem. So they quickly thought, what can we do? But they would use their knowledge of the law to make Jesus obnoxious to people and the government. And so they concocted their little plan that they would get him to say something that they could use to trap him. So if you remember the passage, it said the Pharisees sent their disciples to question Jesus. Now notice that the Pharisees themselves didn't go. They sent their little minions instead. The people they sent were men who were actually in training to become Pharisees someday. And their hope was that Jesus probably wouldn't recognize them. Fat chance of that being the case. As usual, the Pharisees were being their deceitful selves. And then, interestingly enough, they joined forces with the Herodians, which was a strange combination. Now, the Herodians were followers of King Herod, very pro-Roman, supported the taxes very much that kept Herod in power, and encouraged all the people to pay those taxes. While on the other hand, the Pharisees were very anti-Roman, hated the Roman domination, and all the taxes that went with it. But by joining forces, they figured no matter how Jesus answered their questions, he was going to have to make an enemy of one side or the other. So the question they chose to ask was pretty clever. It regarded the poll or the head tax that was levied by the Roman government. And history says that the tax was good. They got a lot of services and a lot of benefits, but they were very, very heavy. People paid dearly for it. So while these men who were questioning Jesus acted like what they were supposed to be, righteous, religious men, Jesus saw them for what they were, hypocrites. Some might say we have a few government officials in that same boat. Nah, we won't go there. You know, it's sometimes easy to fool man, but we can't fool God. And that's a lesson that people often learn the hard way. But as they began their questioning, they immediately try to throw Jesus off guard. They're going to set him up. They point out that he is sincere. He teaches the way of God, is not swayed by what men think or what men say. Little did they know. Sort of reminds you that telephone solicitor when he calls and says, I hope you're having a good day. It's so good to talk to you. You know right off it's something you don't want to hear, and you're going to get a sales pitch if you stay on the line long enough. And these learned men, if you will, were attacking Jesus from that same perspective. They were setting him up for the fall, or so they thought. Then what was the question they asked Jesus? Tell us then, what is your opinion? Is it right to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Jesus wasn't fooled by their attempt at deception. He knew what they were trying to do. People were trying to fool God way back then, just like they do now. Now, as Jesus pondered their question, he quickly structured his response so that neither side was going to be able to find fault with his answer. How did he begin his answer? He said, show me the coin used for paying the tax. Whereupon they immediately produced a small coin, you can see on the screen, called a denarius. The term comes from the Greek word deni, which means 10. At the time, it was worth the equivalent of 10 asses. Thus, put the two together and you have denarius. A Roman soldier was generally paid about 1 denarius for his day's wages. On a side note, one researcher that I looked up wondered if they actually handed Jesus the coin to look at. And some Bibles say they did. But the question was, did Jesus, after looking at the coin, hand it back? Or did he? No, I think Jesus probably would have handed that coin back, but we don't know that. Then Jesus gave them his answer that we've heard many times. Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's. So the answer he gave didn't irritate either group. Those who supported the government and the tax could find no fault because Jesus did indeed pay tribute to Caesar. On the other hand, the Pharisees could also find no fault, as he indicated people should indeed give to God. So his answer was that the people should give to both God and country. But is that any different than the responsibility we have today? Listen to what Paul says in Romans about this subject. Therefore, it is necessary to submit to the authorities, not only because of possible punishment, but also because of conscience. This is also why you pay taxes, for the authorities are God's servants who give their full time to governing. Give everyone what you owe him. If you owe taxes, pay taxes. If revenue, then revenue. If respect, then respect. If honor, then honor. So let's spend a minute or two talking about what do we owe God, what do we owe country. Country. As we heard Paul say in Romans, one of our duties is to pay whatever we owe. And certainly paying taxes is one of those responsibilities. Another would be to obey the laws of the land. We are to honor and respect those in positions of authority. We certainly see a lot less of that today. Think about the police and the problems they have and how they have to deal with folks because they're not respected sometimes. And I can certainly speak to the fact that teachers, who should be in a position to get at least a little respect, don't always get the respect they deserve from students or parents. The Apostle Peter tells us in 1 Peter that we are to love the brotherhood of believers, fear God, and honor the king. That tells me that we need to be praying for everyone, including those who we don't like or maybe don't agree with, whether we like and agree with them or not. Now let's talk about our duty to God. Matthew also tells us that Jesus spoke to that for us. When asked what the greatest commandment was, how did Jesus answer? Love the Lord your God with all your heart,